This is the Education Gadfly Show.
Welcome to the Education Gadfly Show. I'm Stephanie Disler, here to kick things off for this week's episode. Today, Mike McShane, Director of National Research for EdChoice, joins Mike and David to debate trade-offs when it comes to regulation and innovation in the charter school and private school choice sectors. Then, on the Research Minute, Adam Tyner shares a report from the Urban Institute looking at college and career indicators and how they relate to research on post-high school outcomes. All this and more on the Education Gadfly Show, starting now.
Hello, this is your host, Mike Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, here at the Education Gadfly Show and online at fordhaminstitute.org. And now, please welcome back our special guest for this week, Mike McShane. Mike, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be back with you.
Yeah, Mike is the Director of National Research at EdChoice. And in case you forget, wait, where does Mike work again? If you're watching this on YouTube, you know, he's got the great branded shirt here.
Clearly, whatever the last meeting I was in made me change my name to EdChoice, and I realize I have an EdChoice shirt on. So I'm nothing if not relentlessly on brand.
Robert Enlow, president of EdChoice, be very happy with this. Also joining us, as always, not wearing any Fordham gear, David Griffith.
Hey, listen, it says Fordham Institute right next to my name for those.
It does. That does, actually. I should put that on there as well. Welcome back. David was just in Greece and Tunisia.
That's right.
Amazing.
That's right.
Yeah.
It was pretty rough. Actually, it was like about 105 degrees in Tunisia, but it's a beautiful country. I can't say I recommend August as the time to visit, but it was very interesting. We got to see a lot of cool stuff.
And speaking of overseas, Mike is joining us from Ireland, where he lives. It's Waterford, Ireland, as I learned this morning. Married to an Irish woman. And so you really have taken the virtual work thing to a whole new level. I like
For
it.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I worked remotely. EdChoice is headquartered in Indianapolis, and I worked from Kansas City for years. Then the pandemic hit, and I went to Robert and my boss, Paul DePerna, and said, like, do you mind if I work slightly more remotely? And they went for it, and I've been here ever since.
That is fantastic. Well, we appreciate you coming back on the show, Mike, and we are going to talk about school choice, of course, and the forever debate around innovation versus regulation. Let's do that on Ed Reform Update. All right, so Mike, I did a solo podcast a few weeks ago, and I think you noted on X, formerly Twitter, something about it. You feel like Godot. I kept referencing you. And several of the great things you've written lately. And so it made sense to have you on the show and actually have this debate in person rather than to try to speak for you. And look, it's a debate that's, I don't think we're ever going to resolve, but is one of these challenges in the school choice world, both in the public charter school world, but now also in the private school choice world, which is, how do we balance these trade-offs between being open to innovation, new ideas, while also trying to make sure that the schools that we are funding publicly are good schools and getting good results for kids. And it may be that I'm, a few notches over on the side of, hey, we need to worry about quality control and not pretend that we don't know some things about what makes a good school. And my sense is that, you worry about innovations getting blocked. But let me not speak for you any longer. Let you speak for yourself. How do we get this balance right, Mike? How do you think about these issues?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, and it's good. I'm glad we're chatting about this because I listened to that podcast and I read a couple of your pieces. And part of me is trying to actually clarify where we disagree with one another, because it seems at some points there's actually a lot of overlap in the Venn diagram of the two of us. And so the word that you just used there, I think, is the right way of thinking about it, which is trade-offs. Like with all of these things, there are trade-offs. I'm greatly influenced when it comes to writing about regulations. There was a book that is now, more than 40 years old. Stephen Breyer, before he was a Supreme Court justice, wrote this fantastic book called Rethinking Regulation. I think it's a regulation and its reform. Actually, look, if you need, I had it on my desk because I was referring this. And it was talking about, if you remember back in like the 1970s, early 1980s, there was this huge push for deregulation. And interestingly, at the time, it was very much the province of the left. Like Ted Kennedy blurbs this book. He was big into airline deregulation. Jimmy Carter played a big role in it. But anyway, and one of the lines that's always stuck out to me when he talks about like regulations and what they're able to do and what they're not able to do is he calls it like the 90-10 rule, which is it's easy to get 90% of pollution out of a river. It's hard to get the last 10% out. And what regulation tends to be good at doing is getting the kind of worst actors, the sort of worst case scenario things. You can write regulations that can sort of stop that from happening. But that last 10% of stuff that's just like bad or things that you may not like, regulation is not necessarily the best tool in your tool chest to do something about that. So for me, when I think about regulating schools, whether that's inside or outside of school choice programs, I tend to think that regulations are best when trying to like prevent fraud or financial mismanagement or like child abuse or the sort of 90% of pollution in the river that we can get out and that regulation as a tool for it. But I just become more skeptical for that last 10%. And like you, want to see schools doing well and children achieving well. I just don't know if regulation is our best tool to do that or if we need to draw from somewhere else.
So help me understand a little bit better. I like that analogy a lot. So what's the last 10% then? This is what the hardest stuff. It's things like improving student achievement, for example.
Yeah, it would be like the most difficult stuff to actually get out, like the like you're mentioning, like increasing student achievement or whatever, college and career readiness or things. So you can write regulations that can like make sure everybody has a background check, and that can weed out like tons of nefarious people that you don't want. Like you can require financial transparency or auditing of things, and that can weed out, you can get a whole lot of bad stuff out with these relatively blunt. That was a great Breyer term, is that what it said, regulation is a blunderbuss, it's not a rifle. And I don't know if David had a chance to in his travels around the Mediterranean saw any examples of blunderbusses, right? Like primitive shotgun, right? Like it's big patterns of things you can stop. But if you need that rifle to actually say this individual thing is good or bad, like regulation is just not your thing for that.
Right. All right. No, this all makes sense to me. So then let's put it in the context of school choice. Let's say charter schools, right? You have these entities called charter school authorizers. Fordham happens to be one in Ohio, a role that we have learned a lot from. And learned it's really hard to run great schools, it turns out, especially for poor kids. When you have a concentration of low-income kids, you got to really know what you're doing. And so somebody comes to us, makes a proposal, hey, we want to start a school. And part of our job is to get some sense of whether they know what they're talking about, and they've got experience, and they've got the right team, and they have some evidence that there's a demand for their school, on and on. It's regulation, but I like to think it has a more human touch. It's a little more, the old idea was that this is a little more like a venture capital firm investing in a startup, right? It's Shark Tank. It's, you get to know the people, you can ask questions, it's not a faceless sort of, in that context, we're trying to figure out if the ideas they have make sense, right? And so tell me if this is right. My sense is that you think that some charter school authorizers have become too conservative, or maybe overestimate how much they know and how, and therefore say no to some ideas that might be promising. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I would say like maybe a step before that is there's just the process became too bureaucratized. The application processes became longer and longer, requiring more and more information from people, some of it with a dubious connection of whether or not that school is actually going to be successful or not. And that not even just about like innovation, that just kept a lot of people away who said like, I don't have the time, if I'm an educator trying to do this, like I don't have the time or energy to create all the stuff that's necessary for this massive application that has to do. And what it does is it tilts the playing field to the big established operators who have teams of people who can fill out charter, applications and those sorts of pieces. So I think there's multiple different costs there. So it's not just the cost like to regulation, but it's also about just keeping people out because they have to jump through so many hurdles. And a lot of people will say, I'm just not going to do this.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's get one more specific. Okay. So I hear people saying, and we therefore, the charter sector is not as friendly to innovation as it should be. For example, Alpha Schools is this very interesting model. It's getting a lot of attention. It's been written up in several places recently. It is mostly expanding as a private school in a variety of places. In some cases, very expensive private schools, $60,000 tuition you hear about. But the idea is that the kids would spend a couple of hours a day doing core instruction, often online, using AI kind of stuff. And then that frees them up to have more time to get to do other kinds of interesting learning. And the Alpha Schools people have tried to get a charter in a few places. I think so far maybe haven't, or maybe in one, maybe just in Arizona they got yes. And again, the concern is that these charter school authorizers are being too conservative and saying, this sounds too weird. We're going to say no. I mean, is again that what you're worried about?
Sure. I'm not familiar. I'm not that familiar with their model, but
Yep.
Yeah, if people are making, again, by empowering this certain group of people, and especially in states that don't have multiple authorizers, it's different if states have multiple authorizers. But if you have this one group of people and they have certain, we all have biases, right? But like they have certain biases towards, and I think we saw this in the past, right? Like no excuses schools or whatever. Like people had a sort of bias towards them, and the path was easier if you rocked up and said, "Hey, I've got a no excuses school," versus, "Hey, I'm a Montessori school," or whatever. People just through perfectly natural, normal human inclinations would say, like, "Oh, I'm familiar with that. I know what that looks like. I've seen that in other places. So I'm going to be more likely to give that the thumbs up than someone that I have to do a bit more sort of thinking and digging about."
Yeah, yeah, and I guess this is where I start to disagree. I think more clearly, and it's because I think we do have evidence about some of these things, right? So, for example, Montessori is a great example. And if somebody came to us and said we want to start a Montessori school, I'd say, okay, well, what's the population you're targeting? Oh, well, low income kids in one of the Ohio cities. I'd say, okay, well, I want to see some evidence that Montessori has been an effective model for that population. And I think you dig in, you're like, well, it's not a slam dunk, right? I mean, like, okay, how are you going to handle reading? Some of the Montessori schools are a little loosey-goosey when it comes to science of reading stuff. What's your approach? Let me push you on that. And so, sure, if it's, if somebody is going to try something, particularly for poor kids, that has not been demonstrated to work for poor kids, I get nervous. I think with the Alpha School thing, it reminds a lot of us of like the early days of online learning and e-schools. And you're like, well, that model can work for some families, but it doesn't work well for a lot of families who maybe are going through a crisis or don't have what it takes to make sure their kid logs in every day. So, and in a charter model, you got to be open to everybody. You can't be selective. So is this going to work? I mean, these are the kinds of questions. And you're right. I mean, it is this question about whether it is fair for a group of people, these authorizers, to be able to bring in their own experience and understanding of the research evidence versus, letting these innovators try to make the case. And there's the rub, right? How high should the bar be? In a private school choice world, you say, hey, anybody who wants to start a school basically gets to start that school and give it a try. And if they can attract customers, great. In the charter world, you have to jump over this additional hoop of convincing authorizers that your idea is good. David, hop in here. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think I'm pretty much on the record on a lot of this stuff, but I guess for me, the biggest push for Mike is just that, it can't just, well, you're both Mike, but
I'm Italian Mike, he's Irish.
Yeah.
For Irish Mike is that, bona fide innovation is priceless, right? It's like the reason that we have flying cars and computers that can talk to each other across the world and so forth, right? But what characterizes those innovations, what the reason we think of them as innovations and is because they're useful, right? And so I'm very much in favor of useful innovation in education, but I don't, it's not my view that all innovation is useful, right? Or I would use a different word, right? I would just use like malpractice, right? Like you innovated, but the kids didn't learn to read. So I contest your use of the term innovation, right? And that's not to say that we should micromanage everybody, but it is to say that, to me, innovation it needs to be towards what end, right? Towards learning to read better, towards arithmetic, right? Towards content knowledge, towards these goals that are we don't share all of them, we don't weight them all equally, but we have some sense of what we're trying to accomplish. And I guess the sort of point that goes with that is, I just think it's really hard in education, right? When I see an actual innovation in education, I'm very, very excited, but it's happened twice in 2 years, right? Instead, what we get are things that look like they might be really exciting, right? And then you see the results of, online schools is a great example. And it's like, man, nothing works in education, right? Like things that, the internet made everything else wildly more productive, right? And it created a massive motivational challenge in education for kids, right? And it's frustrating, to be honest with you. Like I would love to see innovation, kind of deliver incredible results for kids, but I don't have a lot of sort of proof points for that. I feel like if I were wanted to go out and design a good school right now, I would be going back to things that didn't feel like fads, right? Like the science of reading, right? Like strong content knowledge, strong behavioral standards, high expectations. Like, not that I want to sort of prescribe everything, in minute detail, but I guess I just am not personally convinced that that innovation is sort of in a position to give us what we want it to in education. So I'm more worried about the downside risks than I am about the upside, because the upside always seems to disappoint me.
Yeah, interesting. Is it innovation or is it a fad? Mike, what do you think?
Well, I think it's interesting because one of the biggest growth areas that we've been seeing recently, not just in charter schools, but in private schools as well, is in like classical education. And it's like, classical education is, I guess maybe it's a fad, but it's also not, right? Like it reaches back to this like much older thing. And I think we have to ask ourselves, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, if you went before a lot of charter school authorizers and said, hey, I want to do a school that does Socratic seminars and reads the great books, well, you like their chances? You like their chances of getting approved? I don't know. Maybe today they're better, but I don't know if they would have. The Great Heart schools met with a lot of success in Arizona, so they definitely got approved in those places. But I don't know if that was necessarily their experience across the board. So, and that's again using very traditional. It isn't. Is a Socratic seminar innovative? I don't know. In the year of our Lord 2025, it might be, but it certainly wasn't 2,000 years. You of all people would know, having just been in been in Greece for these things. So that's more like this is I think this is actually helpful to sort of clarify some of this like discussion debate. Is that I'm not actually like a crazy Mike, when you were describing a school, it's like we're going to use AI. I'm like almost like, so I'm going to stop you right there because like I'm not like necessarily the types of schools that I think are most exciting that are happening in America right now are not necessarily we're using AI to whatever, or kids are staring at computers for half the time or whatever. But what they are doing is using traditional methods, but organizing courses differently. They're recruiting teachers in different ways. They're sequencing teaching subjects in different ways. And to me, like that's where like the rubber hits the road of some of these different regulations that come up there. So I think that there's like ways to fix these problems. There's ways to sort of create the space that isn't like whatever AI school or whatever. But again, and I don't know, like, I'm not even like a big in like the charter school world. I'm more in the private school choice world or others. But my kind of beef with a lot of the charter authorizing and others was, even if you wanted to make a kind of traditional school, you're not trying to do something new and innovative. There was just so much bureaucratic stuff that you had to do in order to move forward that people might not want to do that because they'd say the juice is not worth the squeeze, or this stuff that we have to produce isn't actually like evidence that we're going to be a better school.
No, that's well said. And look, it's also the case in charter land that, lawmakers still require charter schools to do a bunch of things. The authorizers aren't allowed to waive. And so some of that stuff might be around the schedule, right? Around And micro schools is hard to pull off in the charter sector because there are certain costs that make it really hard for the finances to work with such a tiny school. And it looks like maybe in the private world, people are figuring out ways to make those tiny schools work and be sustainable financially, which is cool.
Let me just say real quick. I mean, I'm nothing if not a long-termist, right? And so I tend to frustrate people who want to do things tomorrow. But I mean, I feel like, Mike, your example is a great one because
I'm sorry, Irish Mike or
Irish
Italian
Mike. Your example was a great one of what I'm talking about. Like, you're right. I think that there was some resistance to classical education. I'm not, I haven't been in the space long enough to sort of give you a perfect history of it. But as we're talking, right, there are, in fact, like lots of great classical, schools out there, the charter schools. And I think it's because they have a fairly strong track record. And so the space, the charter world has gradually made space for them because guess what? Like, we're not in a position to say you shouldn't be able to do that because you're getting pretty strong results. So I don't know. Like, don't you think that is sort of evidence that if we give this time, we can have our cake and eat it too?
Well, I'm definitely not a we can have our cake and eat it too kind of guy. I think that, well, look, and I think a lot of the movement that we're seeing in the classical world right now is actually in they have the chance to go charter or go private, and many of them are choosing private, and there's probably a reason why they're doing that. So no, I don't think, look, I think it's what's funny, drawing us back to like the beginning of what set off all of this is like the piece that Robert and I wrote a couple of weeks ago, which was like, pro charter schools. Like, this is great, but wouldn't it be great if there was more of this? And by removing some of these impediments, we could have more. So yes, there are classical schools, and yes, that is limited evidence that this process is working, but I think that we could have more of them. And if we removed some of these impediments, we could have more of them. Like, that was our whole piece, was not that we were pro charter schools. Charter schools are great. We just wish there was more of them. And if you remove some of these things, we could probably have more of them. So that's like the whole rub.
We will leave it there. Well said. Irish Mike McShane, Director of National Research at EdChoice. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Now it's time for everyone's favorite Adams Research Minute. Adam, welcome back to the show.
Great to be back.
So is there any big barbecues happening there in Tulsa this weekend?
Probably a lot of them. I was a little under the weather, so unfortunately didn't make it out for any barbecues. But no, it's cooling off a little bit, so you can get back to barbecuing. I was taking a hiatus there for a couple of months when it got a little too warm.
Yep, gotcha. Sorry you're under the weather. Is there a barbecue style in Oklahoma that's famous?
We're kind of a fusion so we got a lot of beef, kind of like Texas. We're not afraid of some sauces, so we got some of that kind of Kansas City thing. I would say it's a more beef centric barbecue than some of the South, which I appreciate. I'm a beef rib guy, so yeah, there is like a distinctive Oklahoma style, but it's a deep cut. You got to really your barbecue to get that deep into it.
Yeah. So someday, David, I'll ask you about the Portland, Oregon barbecue scene.
Yeah, and you'll get a very short response.
That vegan barbecue, I'm sure, is delicious.
Grilled vegetables, man.
All right. Hey, so Adam, what you got for us on the research front?
Well, today's study addresses an important question for states about how to measure student success. That question is, which high school, college, and career readiness boxes actually move the needle after graduation? A paper released this summer by the Urban Institute's Kristen Blagg sifts through more than 100 studies of these college and career readiness indicators and argues that some indicators are solid bridges to college and work, while others aren't all that. A quick word on how she did it. This isn't a single new comparison. It's really more of a sweeping literature review where she reviews over 100 studies providing evidence on post-high school outcomes for 12 or 13 common college and career readiness benchmarks. These include indicators such as how many students enroll in AP courses, scores on college entrance exams, military enlistment, and whether students earn an industry recognized credential. She looks to see whether the thing that the indicator is capturing, such as enrolling in AP courses, is shown in the research to lead either to enrolling in college, getting a college degree, or earning more money in the workforce. So the point here is to sort of rate the college and career readiness indicators based on the research. The paper prioritizes studies that make credible causal claims, randomized admissions lotteries, natural cutoffs around test thresholds, policy phase-ins that create before and after comparisons, and carefully matched designs with rich controls. That part is pretty straightforward, but what is more difficult is that the studies estimate effects of these college and career readiness indicators that are difficult to compare for a bunch of reasons. So some of these comparisons of effects we should take with more than a grain of salt. Also, there are a couple of newer measures, including mandatory FAFSA completion and industry recognized credentials, that probably have less evidence for them simply because they're relatively new. With all that in mind, here's what rises to the top. Let's start with the measures that have the strongest evidence behind them, according to this report. First, the policies that nudge students towards attending college, such as universal ACT or SAT testing and mandatory FAFSA filing. These are pretty consistently moving post-secondary educational outcomes. So when states make the test automatic, a few more students out of every 100 actually enroll in college, especially at four-year and more selective institutions. The percentages are small, but across a whole graduating class, it's often significantly more college goers across a state. FAFSA requirements are even more effective in one widely cited experiment, simply helping families complete the FAFSA and showing them real college costs, boosted enrollment by about 8 students per 100, and those students were more likely to persist too. Next, she reviews the experiences that put real college credit in high school students' hands. Dual enrollment and early college programs are consistent winners. In settings with strong research designs like lotteries into early college high schools, students were several percentage points more likely to go to college and 5 to 12 points more likely to finish a degree on time. The earnings effects are generally positive too. In Texas, dual enrollment students earned about 4 to 9% more a decade later. One step down from that are AP and IB programs. Just enrolling more kids in AP or IB courses doesn't do much itself unless it's expanding access for high achievers who otherwise wouldn't have had the chance. The real action is in the exams. Crossing the credit granting threshold, earning that is a 3 or better on the AP exam, lets students skip intro classes, bumps up four-year completion rates by 1 to 6 percentage points, reduces student debt, and raises the odds of graduate school. On the career side, industry recognized credentials and structured CTE pathways also show some benefits. Students who earn credentials see higher community college persistence and wage bumps of 3 to 9%, with especially big gains in fields like healthcare. Getting into a full technical high school or completing a CTE sequence raises graduation and can boost earnings by double digits, particularly for men and for Black, Hispanic, low-income, and disabled students. Next, she looks at military enlistment, which is kind of an interesting one. That one sits a notch lower, but still has measurable effects. Veterans often earn thousands more per year during service, and many see sustained earnings advantages afterwards, with larger boosts for Black and Hispanic enlistees. The trade-off is fewer bachelor's degrees, but more two-year credentials, and for many, a quicker path to wages and home ownership. Finally, we get to the measures with the weakest evidence. Generic advanced coursework without an external benchmark, that's just taking some tougher sounding classes or forcing kids onto a college prep pathway, that doesn't consistently raise test scores, college entry, or wages. High school exit exams and minimum test thresholds mostly produce null or even negative effects. Students who barely fail are less likely to graduate high school, while students who barely pass only see tiny later gains. Also, JROTC reliably boosts enlistment and lowers attrition in the military, but college going outcomes are mixed to negative as participants often choose service over school. And finally, setting a single college-ready ACT cutoff isn't transformative either. Nudging a score up by one ACT point or a few dozen SAT points can change outcomes for a handful of students on the margin, maybe one student in 200, but it's really pretty weak. Okay, so two important nuances to close. First, who benefits most differs depending on the measure. The career-oriented measures, CTE coursework, industry credentials, and military enlistment, tend to have especially large payoffs for male students, Black students, and Hispanic students, low-income students, and students with disabilities. The informational nudges, universal testing, and the FAFSA nudge do the most good where access and completion were lowest to begin with. Second, external validation matters. Measures that are externally assessed, nationally normed, or translate directly into credit or credentials not only tend to have effects you can carry from one state to another, but also can pull students closer to their actual post-secondary goals. That's why took an AP class is weaker than scored a 4 and banked the credit, and why completed a CTE sequence with a recognized credential shows up in the wage data, while sampled a CTE elective often doesn't. That means, and I'll end with this, that if you're a state or a district leader staring at your accountability dashboard, the practical takeaway of all this is pretty clear. You should prioritize indicators that either remove hidden barriers, confer real portable value, or connect directly to the student's earning power.
Whew, love it, Adam and Kristen. Wow, that is super helpful. Super helpful analysis, and I buy it. I mean, I have a few quibbles. When you talk about, for example, dual enrollment being something that has some kind of external validation. Well, it doesn't, right? I mean, there's no test, and we do worry. I worry. Some of us worry that kids, are taking courses that are actually easier than AP classes and getting college credit because, they just have to get decent grades and there's no external. But you're right, they get the credit. And the point is that credit is then helping them get closer to a post-secondary degree and probably encouraging them to get into that post-secondary route. It is tricky, this notion that some of these indicators are more important for some kids than others. And I don't know how exactly to translate that into these college and career indicators. And of course, the career readiness stuff in terms of real credentials. Yeah, if you get a valuable credential, great. The problem is a lot of these state systems are not differentiating. And so a bunch of kids are getting CPR certification, right? Or the OSHA safety certification, which, I mean, fine. It's great that more kids know CPR and more kids know, how to be safe on the workplace. But these are not certifications that are going to boost your labor market earnings or college going. And so, we've got a problem with that. David, what do you
talked to somebody in a state just a couple of weeks ago who said that there's districts where every student takes like floral arrangement because it counts as an art credit and also as a CTE credit. So they are able to like check this box, and that's the CTE, that's the industry recognized credential that everyone's getting is in flower arrangement, which I'm sure helps, some student out there, but not many.
A bunch of people can DIY when it comes time for their wedding. David, thoughts?
Yeah, I had a similar reaction to you. I basically buy it. I think we shouldn't skip past the finding that sort of these universal graduation standards or exit exams don't seem to move the needle very much. I know we might not agree on this, Mike, but that's consistent, always been consistent with my intuitions. I just think, I don't know, wishing doesn't make it so, right? If you raise the standard, fewer kids are going to cross it, right? But have you really changed anything? I I agree with you on dual enrollment. I have sort of a methodsy, nerdy question about just the way earnings work here. I'm really skeptical of any measure that doesn't get all the way to earnings increasingly, right? Because especially when we're talking about stuff like dual enrollment, right? It's like, what are we even talking about? Are we even talking about high school or college here, right? You've got high school age kids taking stuff that's, you could take it in college or in high school. Really, who cares, right? As long as they're learning the stuff from a public policy perspective. Are we at all worried that just that earnings is kind of being caught up in decisions about who is going to college, right? Because if you enter the workforce, you're just going to have, you're just going to have a completely different trajectory during your 20s, I feel like, in terms of your earnings. I don't know. Adam, do you have any comment on that? I was mostly convinced by that, but I just wonder, if you're 25 or 26, should we really expect you to earn the same amount if you're coming right out of college versus, you've been in the workforce for, I don't know, 8 years or something? Maybe it's not an answerable question, but I guess I'm struck by how difficult it is to know which of these pathways is really right for any given student because they are evolving over the course of at least a decade. And every kid's trajectory is a little bit different. So I agree. I think it's useful. It points me in the right direction, right? It points me.
But your main point is what? That it's, at what age is it fair to really think about earnings?
Yeah. I think there's a reason we're struggling with this, right?
Yeah.
This is, I think earnings is better than college completion, which is better than college enrollment. But even earnings, I found myself questioning, do we really know, right, if the kids are better off at 25?
Well, and I thought there was a study, is it Hanishek or was it some other, I forget now, but that was showing, maybe with international data, that even if you get a short-term boost from things like career training when you're young, that over the long term, you still get passed by similar people that went the more college route, right?
That's always been my worry, right? And I don't know, there's something circular about saying you went into the workforce, as opposed to college, and you earn more. It's like, of course you do, right? That's
I don't think that's the main way that they identify earnings effects, though. I think most of the time they're just taking the people who didn't go to college and comparing their earnings.
Okay.
So I think they're normally trying to control for that, because you're absolutely right, David. That would be very fair.
Yeah,
okay,
but look, if the alternative is you leave high school without a plan and you end up working a low-skilled job and that's your path, versus, you've got some kind of trajectory into, a higher wage earning occupation, right? That's what we want, right? So
I guess the only other thing I would note is that some of these, they're not pushing against each other, but some of the nudges are pushing people into college, right?
Yes.
And others are, the point isn't to keep them out of college, but the point is to give them a plan if they're not going to college. That's what Mike's always on about with CTE. And so, these are different groups of kids, but I think it's notable, right, that these things are pointing in opposite directions. And go ahead, Mike.
No, that's right. You worried that does the FAFSA nudge, for example, nudge some people into college who, maybe aren't actually well prepared to succeed there. And how do you balance that with, you found this kid who's some, poor rural school that otherwise thought college was too expensive, and now, they see that it's a doable thing and they go. And so you want that. That is what's tricky. And I'm glad it sounds like Kristen tried to get into this with, again, these things impact different kids differently. All right, gang. Hey, that I think is all the time we've got. So we should wrap it up. But Adam, thank you for that. Hope you feel better. One last thing. Go Blue this weekend. Big game.
Over Sooner, baby.
Oh boy, Michigan versus Oklahoma. All right, we'll talk next week about how it goes.
Only met one time before in history is what I read. Is that true?
Oh my gosh, amazing. Okay, that is exciting.
You were alive, but I wasn't, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, ouch. Now really throwing me under the bus. All right, gang. Until next week.
I'm David Griffith.
And I'm Mike Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, signing off.
The Education Gadfly Show is a production of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, located in Washington, D.C. For more information, visit us online at fordhaminstitute.org.